Nice. A little meh face. Okay. Good dancer. Oh, deer in the headlights, death, scream face. Nice. Someone found the banging their head against the keyboard emoji. Hospital. Cool. Nice. Well, this will be the last. So, John, this will be the last lecture for the day, and then you get some more time to work in partners and just sort of, get that afternoon buzz going. We used to do these check-ins at the end of the day, but we felt like students were moving too long into the afternoon, and it wasn't very productive to do them at the end of the day. Plus, a lot of people are on the East Coast and some are on the West Coast, so it's kind of hard when you're pairing up with somebody who has different obligations depending on what time of day it is. So hopefully, yeah, 17 children. Wow. That's got to be a Lambda school record. Okay, no children. Oh, wow. Okay. I was going to say, that's got to be not only a Lambda record, but no, he said he's kidding. Okay, let me share my screen here. All right, so let me silence my notifications. Awesome. I was helping some people with a lot of things. A lot of them were just environment issues. And the goal here is to not just frustrate you to the point that you hate life. We want you to hate life a little bit. And I want to pull up this diagram real quick just to remind you of some things. So we use this model called experiential learning. And experiential learning is the process of learning by doing, okay? And oh, this is a great model right here for this, okay? So here is what we do here at Lambda School. Up until this point, you've been in this little yellow circle in your comfort zone. Maybe you've taken a step or two out of it to get, pretty much like dumped into this program, right? You've put your life on hold, right, for 6 months, which is an amazing amount of time considering, what, you could be doing. And you've dedicated your life for these 6 months. You've learned some pre-coursework stuff you maybe had never learned before. Maybe you were like me when you first started learning to code and you came at it from a completely different background or career. Like for me, I had never written a line of code before, starting to learn. And so it was like a brand new process. So you instantaneously move out of your comfort zone into what we call, and what is commonly, the learning zone or your like edge work, right? And right here is outside of this comfort zone is where the optimal like learning begins, okay? It's because you're stressed enough, you have enough like external stressors that the school puts on you by design to get out of that zone far enough to flourish, right? Your fight or flight can sort of kick in, and hopefully it's your fight. And you can activate that parasympathetic nervous system and get those external responses and say, I can do this. Like I can move out of my comfort zone further and further. And by doing so, your comfort zone will eventually grow because you'll learn new skills and new techniques. And then you move into the danger zone where it's like you shut down completely. That's your flight, right? So we want you to be in this green zone, not in the yellow zone, and we don't want you to be too far out of the comfort zone. So I can guarantee you, we are going to be throwing at you, if you feel like you're drowning right now, we're going to be throwing at you the little floaties so you can just barely get your nose above water for the majority of the program, okay? So that's what we did this afternoon. We threw you into the deep end. You probably had never pair programmed before, at least remote. A lot of you had some environmental issues, and some of you are still facing those. We're going to get those things ironed out. Just trust me, the experience becomes smoother and smoother as you continue to gain the skills necessary, okay? All right, so after that little like pep talk and spiel, I wanted to talk about some pair programming techniques. Let's move back into CS6. So just some like command line stuff. I'm moving around. Okay. Cool. I wasn't in the right directory. I thought I was. Okay, so I'm moving around my directories. And CD is change your directory, right? You just get more and more comfortable with those command lines as you continue to use them. So that's the only way to practice them, is to use them, okay? So I went ahead and I forked and cloned the JavaScript 1 directory. So I'm going to open that in VS Code. And we're going to talk about what it means to effectively pair program, okay? So I spoke with a couple of you, maybe just one pair, and we went over a couple of techniques. So one of the techniques that we like to use here at Lambda School, and that you'll use most often in pair programming, is the technique of what's called navigator driver paradigm, okay? So the navigator is the person who is actually telling the driver where to go, okay? So as a driver, I would be the person responsible for writing all the code. So is Emily available? I thought I saw you jump in, Emily. I'm going to put Emily on the spot if she's here. Yes, I see her. If you're not available to speak, that's cool. But if you are, maybe I should have reached out beforehand. Oh, you don't have a mic. That's fine. Okay, so maybe somebody wants to volunteer to be my driver or to be my navigator while I drive real quick. Who wants to just unmute themselves and volunteer to tell me the code that I need to write between lines 3 and 5 to get this test to pass?
CBR0.
Okay, I'm assuming I break my line here. So CBR
yes.
at 0?
Yes. I mean the number 0.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, sweet. Sorry, that was by design. Awesome, thank you. Whoever stepped up, I wasn't sure who that was. Jessica, thank you. Awesome. Okay, so that's how you would drive. It's that simple. You would collaborate and talk about things and be like, well, I think about this, right? But you're supposed to collaborate in this pair, and one person is to type while the other one navigates. And then after about a half an hour or so, switch places. So you each get, the same amount of time, a couple hours each day actually writing the code. And then once you get the test to pass for one of you, right, make sure that you get both partners up to speed. Okay, so that's all I had about pair programming. Then at the end of it all, you're going to commit your code to your fork. So you're going to run, all of your git commands. If there are 3 people, keep taking turns with the 3. I think there was one trio, but one person we were looking for. So if you're in a trio, you'll cross collaborate. It gets a little trickier, but you can still achieve the same goals, right? You just get less time. You have basically 2 navigators and one driver, and you guys are collaborating a little bit more as a team. So normally pair programming, it's done in pairs, which is why it's called pair programming. It's not done in triplets or whatever. Okay, so what now that I have run npm install, so I've gotten my tests, or my packages that will run my tests, okay? And so now I can go and I can run the command npm test and just run it over the callbacks file. So if you add this, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. If you add this piece right here, it's gonna go look for a file. This is saying, hey, npm test, run a command, a script called test, which is defined right here, beep, beep, right there, okay? And look for a file called callbacks.test.js. You can just shorthand it by saying callbacks. And it's going to go into the tests directory. It's going to look for callback tests, and it's going to look at these tests. So we're going to talk for a second about these tests in just a minute after I run this command. All right, getting it, going for it. Okay, so look at this. We have two passing tests and 11 failed of 13 total. So this is our summation of what we just did. All right, our next thing that we can look back are the tests that we're actually passing. So green check marks are gonna just all of a sudden instantaneously release this just tiny bit of dopamine that keeps you, it's like a little high, okay? You get a little bit of a rush every time you pass some tests. Believe me, that doesn't go away. It just gets more exciting as you continue to develop in your career, okay? Or maybe you're stoic and you're not as crazy as I am, and you're not insane like myself. Okay, and so this right here, what we can do is we can go back and see that it's going to show us the first thing that failed. So right here we have this beautiful little error message. By the way, there's two things that make me really, really happy in this world. And one of them is awesome error handling and error messages. The other is good documentation. So if you can achieve both of those things, you have succeeded in my world, okay? So this error message is telling us that callback functions, okay, so that's the suite that we're looking at, which is right here, okay, awesome. At getLength, that's the nested testing suite that we're looking at right here. So you can follow along with this. If you fail a test, you can go look for the outer suite, which is a describe block that's called callback functions. Okay, and then you can go look for another describe block because it's got a caret here and it points to the next describe block and it says, hey, getLength is failing us somewhere. So let's look for the getLength suite and then let's look further at the tests that we're failing. Now these, anytime there's an it, that is a test block. It's called an assertion. Well, it allows us to write assertions. When we say expect, that's the assertion that we're looking at, okay? So right here, check this out. We have this way to test if you got the length of this array back from the test. So if you properly wrote your code right, this test will go run and grab your getLength method from callbacks.js, and it'll go and execute it with mock data. It'll give it fake data so that we can see whether or not you're actually writing the code, okay? So if you pass the test, it means you've written the correct code, all right? So this right here will say expect length to be 5. So we set length to 0, we ran our function, and then we set it to the length that gets called back with our callback. So check it out. This is your callback function, okay? So this is exactly the code, pretty much the same code that I showed you earlier, right? Where we have a callback, a CB parameter. I use the word callback, okay? And then we have a full-on anonymous function that we pass to it as an argument. Okay, what questions do you have until this point? This other test that we're using actually tests to see if this callback gets called. So it's a very nifty mock function that we use to see if we actually call that function and called with the proper value. So does anyone have any tests about this, right? Or does anyone have any questions about this right now? Tests, I got tests on my mind. So this is how you would read your tests moving forward. And it's gonna really give you a leg up when you're looking at how your data is, how your functions are being called. Like, what's the code that I need to write? There's a little bit of instructions in there, but the rest of it you're going to find from the test file, okay? So this is how I would read tests. I go in and I figure out what's being tested and then what's being expected out of those tests. And you're going to get better and better at this. In fact, we have 2 dedicated sprints teaching you how to write tests, okay? Once all your tests are passed, go ahead and submit, commit all of your code through Git, and then submit a pull request, person by person. And in the pull request name, I want to see your first and last name because it's hard for me to hunt down who you are with just emails, okay? All right, so let's dive further. It looks like maybe one person. What about the stretch problems? Stretch problems are designed to maybe touch on some information that you haven't received yet that would force you outside to look for further help other resources by other resources, and really test. They're designed to stretch you beyond the intention of all of our lessons that we provide, right? But eventually you will get the ammo that you need to be able to solve those stretch problems. So I highly recommend in your free time going back, if you never solved the stretch problems in any of these assignments, and looking at them even further. So it's sort of like, it's not like an extra credit because there's no like, we don't have like grading, we check your code when it comes through, and we're going to be doing, code reviews in the near future once we get like a big army of TAs to come and support. So once we have this support, we're going to be doing code reviews where we look at all the code as much as possible. Right now, definitely some weaknesses in that. but we're working on continuously like providing support as needed. So if you get, yeah, there's no such thing as C's or A's or B's, but just get your reps in, get your code written. That's the best way to learn. And once again, it's experiential. It's learning by doing. And in our case, it's learning by doing things that you may have never done before in your life. And it's a different style because we're not like, we're not going in and, writing with red pen and everything. We'll correct you if we need to, for sure. And we'll provide the support for you if you fall behind or, if, familial issues come up, we can provide that support. That's the best part of the nature of our online program is that we have the ability to help you out and provide that support. And more support and staff, it's coming. We're a startup, so we're growing. We're gathering all the right people and putting them in the right places. And pretty soon, there's going to be just so many TAs that you're going to have so much organization around that. But TBD about how that's all exactly going to be running through. So stretch problems, we want you to attempt. Push yourself to research and learn about, and then move forward. We don't want you to spend your entire day on a stretch problem. We would prefer you spend maybe 30 minutes at the most on a stretch problem, and then move on if it's gotten you that far. If you've gone that long. Okay, so for callbacks, pretty much this idea, I wanted to go through this idea of how this callback stuff is working and make sure that you all are very well at this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my Quokka right here. So this is the command that I start. And I'm going to just call first item and see what it outputs when I pass it an array of, Fred, Wilma, and it's Barney and Betty, right? Is that Barney's spouse? I think so. Now look what's going on here. All I've done is called this function and passed it an array, right? An array of strings. Oh, and Dino, can't forget Dino. And there's Bam Bam and Pebbles too, but cool. I've just passed this an array of strings, okay? So it's very, very similar to our array of superheroes from earlier. Now, callback is not defined. What is callback supposed to be? I've mentioned this earlier, and I just want to move straight forward into it. So what's interesting about this is with our function here, we're expecting it to be passing back the first item of the array into our callback that's going to be executed. So this function right here gets executed on what line? When I call first item, what line will this lambda function or this anonymous arrow function be called or executed? In this file. Sorry.
Ryan.
Yes.
You don't even need brackets. You could just put any input as an argument and just return that argument after the anonymous function.
Correct. That would imply that I am implicitly returning something, so we can get there. Right now, we're simply just calling the function. So there is nothing that's going to get returned out of this, this function here. But if I was returning something, you're right. This callback will get executed with that line, right? So, but yes, you can write your callback in line, and you're absolutely right. You'd get this return function, and you could say item, and I could say something to the effect of console.log item. But, however, I'm not returning anything out of my callback. So I'm trying to implicitly return something. So there we go. We get Fred. But the instructions never said anything about returning, so you don't need to return that function right away. But this right here, this is saying there's an implicit return in this manner. Okay? So this arrow function has an ability to write a code block or to just not pass a code block and return something. But I wasn't going to go down that route. So for now, there's just no implicit return. We're just console logging Fred. Okay? So, okay, this item right here becomes what? What is mapped? So what is this? And nobody answered my question. Where does this callback actually get called in my code? Where does this function get executed? Line 5, right? Okay, and then we're passing it what? The first element in the array, right? The first element in the array is going to be some sort of item. You could have said element, whatever, and then console.log element. Whatever you name here, this is the parameter that this argument will become, which is kind of funny because there is an argument and a parameter situation going on right here. So here's array, which is the parameter, and then the argument gets this, right? Okay, so remember, callbacks are functions that you can pass around as arguments and supply them to other functions. So that's what this CB does. So as far as that implicit return goes, right now it doesn't like this syntax. So I guess console.log returns an element. So at that point, then yes, there would be an implicit return that would work in that case. It still wants me to break the line because my code's too long. But yes, you can write your function just like this.
Ryan.
Yes.
The reason why you wouldn't be able to return it is because of JavaScript's native promise module or something, like the way it actually executes promises. They're going to fix it, and I think the next, ECMAScript, whatever.
Oh, sweet. So that's good news, always iterating. And the thing is that makes me a little bit weary about your discovery there is that there is no promise. So promises are something you learn more about in like weeks 5 and 6. Okay, so there is no promise at this case. There also is no like asynchronous code. It's just this, well, it is kind of asynchronous because we're defining the function here and then calling it here, but it's getting called at runtime of this function. So we'll table the promise discussion for now. Thanks for the tip. That's awesome. I definitely think that researching and understanding why there may be, some sort of problem, is always recommended. Diving deeper into, the spec, MDN resources and things like that will help you become a better programmer and help you find the answers to questions that you may have. Because you may be looking at something and be like, why doesn't this do what I'm expecting it to do? And it may just be something that JavaScript does that you're not familiar with, or it may be something that is a broken part of the specification. So Alex, thank you so much for bringing that up. So Allah said, so basically callback CB is a function inside of a function. And why do we use this technique? Well, it allows us to write functional programming because you're not concerned, Alex, about how this function gets called. Okay, you're not concerned about anything that this function actually does except for supplying it with the proper argument. So now I can reuse code over and over again, and we can reuse it in different ways. So I can say, or not code, I can reuse first item. So I can call first item again, pass it a different array, and get a different element from that array. So let's say George and, I forget George's wife's name in the Jetsons, but we'll just go Elroy, his son. So now I can execute a callback function or pass this a callback function and say like first name or like the first item, right? And that's fine. Like, I don't want to call it the same thing. Item 1, cool. And then I can look and reuse this code over and over again. So I can say, hey, what is item 1 going to be? Tell me about it. And in this case, it's George because we called the function again. So CB, this is why we do this for code reusability. We can reuse code over and over and over and over again. We can use this function to our advantage and define it in every different way. So what if you had something to the effect of, let's see, what is it good? I mean, let's say that every single one of these arrays was tied to a specific like user, okay? So each user had this information. You wanted to know the first name of every user, right? Well, Fred and George would be the first names of these given arrays. They're different arrays. You can use this function over and over and over again in your program. It's called functional programming. It's one of the best parts about JavaScript is because you can assign a variable to a function and then just pass it around like whatever. So I can say something to the effect of, my callback equals a function that takes a single parameter. So let's say that item 1 comes in, and I just say console.log item 1. And then instead of passing this entire system here, I can pass it my callback. And look, we get the same effect. So now I've effectively created one piece of code that I can now pass more times than I could ever want. My callback, and that's going to actually not work because it's not defined yet. So look, in one instance of this same code, same exact code, one instance, it's giving me Fred, and another instance, it's giving me George. I'm calling it, executing it, and using it to my advantage. Now I could change this data. This data could change. The callback function is going to do the same thing. So this is the power of functional programming, of passing functions to other functions and using those little miniature programs to build giant programs. Really, a piece of software is just a bunch of little programs put together, right? Does that answer your question, Ala? CB definitely is nomenclature. It's not that important you use CB. You could call CB anything you want it to be. Most of the time, it's called callback, or some anonymous function, or it is what it's called. What it is in the language itself, the paradigm. It's a callback. It's a function. It's not a function at the time that we declare the variable, but we're expecting that when first item gets called, callback will be a function that can use first item. And it takes you a lot of time, a lot of practice to get used to these things. This is not a trivial paradigm, especially if you're not used to functional programming and not used to programming in general. Callbacks are a part of a lot of scripting languages. Lots of languages out there use callbacks often. Okay. JavaScript is one of those languages where callbacks are just so commonly used because they can get executed. It can be blocked in the way that the code gets written can be operated asynchronously. And because of that, even though JavaScript is single-threaded and it reads your file from top to bottom, left to right, you can your code can get compiled, and all of these callbacks will be added to what's called the call stack and executed when they are supposed to be, which allows you to really create program control or program flow. So Chris, I'm not sure if that's a question, if you're referencing another comment. It is weird. It's hard to teach callbacks in the sense that we give you practice with them, but yes, I think I know what you're saying. We're just defining this function and using it as a contrived example, something we come up with, to sort of show off the benefits of the language and stuff. So yes. That's the key to it. This is not defined. Right now, callback is not defined until we actually call the function in which it's being passed to. That's a very, very good point. So callback all of a sudden becomes defined, and it gets set to my callback, which is this piece of code. So we're shoving this piece of code into this piece of code to make it do something. All right, that should give you guys enough ammo to continue this file. If you haven't finished all of this, you should be able to get all the way through contains, and maybe some beyond. And then once again, you get today and tomorrow to work through JavaScript 1. If you finish early, I have some files that you can work through, some problems, some more reps, some more practice problems. Some of it may be repetitive, but it'll help you in the end for sure. We've got plenty to work on for sure. All right. Okay, so now, yeah, will do, Alex, no problem. Okay, let's talk about objects. I didn't want to do that. I just want to do this. New JavaScript. Okay. So if I had, a lot of times we store items in this array, and it's really great. You can store whatever type of data you want in an array. You can store functions in an array, execute those functions how you'd want. But a lot of times we store a lot, we need a little bit more of some associative data. And what do I mean by that? Well, data that you can access not necessarily by an index, but by some sort of key. And so you give your code a key, and you say, hey, code, I want whatever is found at this position, by this key. Okay, and it's very, very powerful sort of random access way of accessing code and information, accessing data. Okay, so the other major, and it's the most commonly used data structure in JavaScript. It's called an object. Okay, so if I had an object and said const my object, or I'm going to say me object equals just an empty, this is called an object literal, meaning it's literally pointing to an object. Okay, it's just a literal definition of an object right there. Okay, so if I had this, in fact, I'm going to pull up some handy dandy notes real quick, because I have like all the previous classes that I've taught this stuff to. I have their notes like stored away. See all of them. Let's see some of these. Awesome, that's what I want. Sweet. Okay. Hey, this works. Okay, so let's talk about objects and how we actually can reason about using these. So if this is an object that's gonna, let's move back into like our variable situation. So I'm gonna say const name equals Ryan, and then I can chain on, this isn't the best practice, but it's a common practice. You see it in documentation all over the place. I'm gonna chain on a bunch of different constant variables here. I'm gonna say, occupation, let's say web builder, and it doesn't like my syntax here. Oh, equals, sorry. Doesn't like my syntax because it's not valid syntax. And I can say essentially, let's say occupations web builder, let's say hair color is red for all intents and purposes, because the ginger beard. Okay, so I have just created 3 constant variables, okay? So I can now reference these. I can use Quokka to see what's name, awesome, what's occupation, great, web builder, okay, what's hair color. And traditionally, you would see this more commonly like separating your variables as commas in that sense in a lot of documentation and stuff. It's not necessarily considered bad practices. It's just not the best practices in the world. And I don't know, like there's really no term. It's not bad. They're fine practices. They're just fine. Okay, so now I've instantiated or made this me object. Okay, so now what I can do is I can assign these variables places into this me object. And the most straightforward way to do that is by saying name equals name, okay, and occupation equals occupation. So there's a little bit different syntax here that you're probably not used to. Okay, so I have 3 variables, name, occupation, and hair color, and I'm assigning them value. I'm assigning them a place in this object. So if I want to reference my name, I can say me object dot name, and it's going to give me, well, let's console log it. It's going to give me my name straight out of that object, okay? And the reason that I'm showing you this is because there's multiple ways to actually add stuff to an object, and there's multiple ways to reference things from within an object as well, okay? This is called dot notation. Okay, let me enhance my screen a little bit. This is called dot notation, so reference of the object and then the name that's on that object. Okay, so find the name property or key and whatever the value is at that name. In this case, name is a variable that points to Ryan. So we have Ryan getting printed out in the console to my right here. You can see it down here in the output. Okay, so that's how we sort of can start to think about and conceptualize objects. Okay, so if I had a function on here that was say name, you could store it the same way that you do your other functions. Say name is now going to be set equal to an anonymous function. You could use an arrow function here as well. And I'm going to simply return, and we're gonna talk about this much in further detail, but I'm gonna say console.log. So my say name function is simply gonna say, hello, my name is, and then I have to pass it some sort of way to interpolate that data. Okay, and don't worry about the this keyword right now. Okay, this keyword is something that we go into, major depth in. So let me just save this file, examples. Let's say object examples. Okay, and got to restart the little code here. Okay, so now one thing that I could do is I could actually reference this object, and by this same structure here, what do you think I have to do to call say name? I can say me object dot how do I call the say name function? Method. It's now a method. Bracket notation could potentially work. I'm trying to use dot notation here. It's not a very tricky question. Yep, me object dot say name. Exactly. And I can just simply call that function. Console is not a function. Console. Maybe it does not like the outer context of this. That's my trouble for using the keyword. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pass this some sort of name parameter, and then I'm going to say name that comes in, and then I can pass Ryan to this and see if that's what's tripping it up. Okay, why is it saying console is not a function? Console, oh, maybe I just need to get rid of it like this. Oh, console.log. Oh, geez. Oh, geez. Okay, I'm so sorry. That's where you guys come in handy. You're supposed to say, hey, and I think Samuel, you got it right. So thank you. Much appreciation. Okay, so moving on. It was working. I just had to call .log. I had to actually call the log function. That's what I was trying to do, is log it out, right? So this is what's super important here, is that we actually can call a method that lives on an object. Okay, so you can store whatever you want inside of an object, and then use that method later on. So it allows you to provide a rich data store that you can reference in that way. So if I wanted to reference every single thing in this object here, I could simply come in and say, we're going to go with name, occupation, and hair color. So now if you see, I'm referencing all these values from inside of my object. Okay? So let's look at some shorthand. Let's say this object changes over time, and all of a sudden I got an email. I've made it to the 20th century, the tail end of the 20th century, and gotten myself an email. So I can say something to the effect of me object, and then just assign it an email. Okay, and I can say now Ryan@isawesome.com. Whoa. So let's check out our object now and see what happened. Unexpected token import. I don't know what that means. Me object.email. I have some typo somewhere, so let me figure it out. Oof. Sorry, phone's going off. Okay. That was an Amber Alert. Those always scare me. Okay, so now I got myself an email and it's working. I can actually reference that email later on. So notice that inside of our object creation, we didn't specify any place for an email. This is how you would create a reference to email. You'd say you'd create a variable called email on this object. It's actually a key or a property that you can assign this string or assign something to it, okay? So I could use that same logic and do the same thing with another function or whatever I wanted to do. But for now, this is the extent that I want to talk about like object literals, okay? And then another way to reference this stuff is, somebody alluded to it earlier, the bracket notation. So another way to reference an object is by passing it brackets and then in quotes, the field that you want referenced. So this field name is being referenced like this. So there's a major difference between the syntax there, and there's some actual key differences that we can talk about in a future time. But I want everyone to make sure you go ahead and open up a file, create an object, write your name, occupation, hair color, and then some function that prints out, just like you can copy this right away, just prints out your name. And you could get even further into this. Instead of logging all this stuff, you could say name actually is a function that, hello, my name is Ryan, and let's get rid of, no, occupation is fine. And you can follow along with me now if you're already at this point. This dot occupation, and I have, sorry. Okay. Hello, my name is Ryan. I am a web builder. I have red hair. It's a beautiful sentence. It's more like, hello, my name is Ryan. I'm a web builder. I have red hair. I should be putting a comma in there. I don't like that this broke lines like this. It's kind of weird. It's another beautiful reason to use backticks is you can drop spaces like this, and it's a template, interpolates that. So once you're done with that, go ahead and click on this message. Yeah, thanks for the thumbs up. Right, I was muted, sorry. I'll wait for just another minute and then we can move forward. Okay. Now, let's say we forget all about our me object. Let's just make a me object. And let's actually assign it these values that same way we just did. But we're not going to do it literally. We're going to assign them with dot and object or bracket notation. So first off, I can say something to the effect of me object, well, I can shorthand that whole thing that we just did. I can go in here and I can say name, hair color, occupation. And then I can write a function called, I can say const my name equals function, takes in some sort of, well, it's just going to console.log this dot name. We'll just do that for now. Okay. And then I can say this me object dot say name equals my name. And it's not getting the context that you would want it to get because it never gets attached to this. So this is where this keyword would break down because of this keyword, this arrow function problem. Okay. We are going to go, like I said, into further depth on this later. Okay. But, you know, this is how you could essentially shorthand everything that we had. Instead of having to write, you know, name is name, right? You can just simply do it in one shorthand. Okay. Or you could come about and say me object at either name equals name, and oh, we don't want this to be done anymore. We'll do that in just a second. Okay, and then you could say console.log me object. So I probably should have started with this, but I just wanted to show you there's different ways of creating objects, right? So I've defined an object and now I'm just assigning it properties, assigning its properties values. I'm creating properties on the fly. Me object doesn't have a name property until I do so right here and say name. So by that same nature, I can say me object dot occupation equals occupation. You know, I'm just essentially building this object. Okay. All right, let's get rid of the say name function. Okay, so under the hood, if this was to look like an array, and I wanted to save Ryan, Web Builder, and Red as the first three indices in this array, how would I have to build this object so that that works? Yeah, that would be very, very cool. So the question is, how does this translate? Like, how do we make, and the reason I'm alluding to this question, because I wanted you to see just kind of what an array looks like under the hood. Category item 1, item 2. Kind of. Arrays are more like hash tables under the hood as opposed to a linked list. There is no like next pointer. The indices in an array don't know anything about one another. I mean, when you use a splice method, it just cuts something out of the array, things like that. But like indice 5 doesn't know about indice 6. They're just there. They're just, yeah. Linked list is a data structure that's a little bit more sophisticated than an array. But how would I go about like looking at this? If I was to create an object that looks like an array, it has nothing to do with like arrays itself. What I'm looking at is key value pair mapping. So if I wanted to say, if I want to represent this data in an object that looked a lot like an array, I would start by the 0th index, right? And I would say, is Ryan. Ooh, nice. And then I would say something to the effect of 1 is Web Builder. 2, and so on and so forth. So I'm just sort of demystifying and showing you kind of what an array is like under the hood. It's very, very similar to this. Anthony, what you've shown is a little bit, yes, Vartan, you got it absolutely right. I should have just waited for you to finish what you were saying. I could, when I create the object, use numbers, but that number as a property will get typecasted to a string, which is why I could never do anything like meObject.0. That is invalid syntax. This will not work. Okay? I could reference it as 0. Okay? They get typecasted or changed from one type of an integer or a number into another, cast to a string. So if you do this, which you wouldn't want to do this, you just want to use arrays instead. I'm just demonstrating this to you to show you that that's sort of what's going on in that sense. Okay? Now, another gotcha with arrays is we've gone through, and if I said type of meObject, and that returns something, so I'm going to console.log what that returns. What is it? It's an object, right? But what if, bear with me, what if this was an array? What the crap? Why is that an object? Alex asked, how come JS doesn't use symbols? Are you saying like symbol, like private symbol variable types? That's the 7th type in JavaScript is the symbol type, but we're not concerned with it for all intents and purposes of this course because it's used in the classical sense when you build classes and stuff. So. Allah mentioned everything, and Chris mentioned array is an object, and everything in JavaScript is an object. So how would I test if this object, if this right here was actually an array? Because it's an array, right? And I want to be able to be aware of that. But in this case, it's saying, hey, type of is giving me object. Well, array is a specially treated type of object, right? So it's just an object. But there is a method on the overall global array prototype, which means capital array. You can actually ask something if it is an array. Pretty nifty, right? And it'll give you a true or false. No problem, Caleb. Yeah, instance of should work here too. This is probably the easiest way to determine if something is an array in JavaScript. So you can have a check that says, hey, if array.isArray, pass it your data that you're looking at, and move forward with that. Okay, so with objects, let's go back. I keep getting derailed on all these things, and I'm like, oh, I wish I had taught them that. I wish I had taught them that. This object that we have right here is just fine. I want to show you a few methods that, remember, what's Ryan's very favorite data structure? An array, right? I love arrays, okay? So there's a way to actually now, with CS6 and beyond, use a method which you can use in your homework when you get to objects to find out what the keys and what the properties are of an object. And that method is object.keys, Casey. And I can just pass it to meObject, and I can assign this, well, what I can do is say const new me, or object keys, objects keys equals this, and then console.log out objects keys. Check it out. What do we get returned out of this? Hip hip array, as Chris did in all caps earlier. Okay, so this object.keys method takes in an object and gives you back an array of that object's keys. Very interesting that you could use this in your assignment today. Okay, and then you could assume if these are values that are found at those keys, what method on the object prototype could I use to find the objects, to turn the objects' values into an array as well? I could map over this object. You're absolutely right. Well, no, I'd want to map over an array. I could build my own map function that takes an object with it as well. You can only map over, if you want to use this syntax of dot map, you can only map over, you kind of map over an object, you can only map over arrays. But I could map over this object's keys now and get these values, right? Yes. That's what I was just saying. So yeah, you could map over that because this is an array, right? I can't map over an object, but I can map over an array, but we'll learn more about that later on. Object.values, there it is. Okay, so I can say, and somebody may have said it earlier, but no, okay, cool. So I can do the same thing and just change keys to values. I'm gonna have to lowercase this. And console.log this instead. So check it out. Now I have two nifty arrays that I can use to map over and compare and check and do whatever I want with. Pretty leaning there. That'll actually, these lines of code will potentially pass, two functions tests in your objects examples. Is objects.keys a linear time? It's a very, very good question. So let's think about this just a minute. It is going to iterate, yeah, it'll be linear, because it's going to simply iterate as long as there are keys to iterate over. So the more keys you add here, the more complex it'll be. So yeah, it's an iterator function. So it could be costly if you have a giant data set. But it's like super duper optimized. So let's imagine you had an array of objects and you were trying to just get out all the keys. For-in has some limitations, and I'll let you actually look those up. There's a really, really awesome Stack Overflow article explaining why these new methods exist and why we like them. They provide a little bit more strict parameters. When you're running a for-in loop, it'll actually iterate over an object's prototypes as well sometimes. So you can look that up and get further into that. But there are issues with for-in loops, and people are moving away from them, which is why the Airbnb linter will not allow you to use a for-in loop. For-of loops are a little bit different, but yeah, these keys. So this is what I love, and this is my secret. When I play around with data, when I have a lot of data, I need to map something or I need to change or reduce something, I usually turn it into an array, and that's fine. Unless you're really, really strict about performance cost, that's never something that I've ever had to have an issue with, right? I've built a few production level, enterprise level applications, and I've never gotten into trouble by using things like this as far as performance wise goes. More so in back-end performance. When we're talking performance, we're talking about time it takes to operate an entire algorithm. And that time can get more and more complex as things go along. Okay, so I talked about object keys, object values. What else? I'm going to go in depth into closure tomorrow, and then a little bit further into things. Like these stretch problems are pretty nifty, pretty gnarly stretch problems. But yeah, I'm going to go in depth into closure tomorrow morning, and we're going to look at scope and closure. So that's our day tomorrow. And then we're going to briefly touch in the afternoon on recursion. And it's going to be fun because tomorrow morning I'm actually going to solve this problem right here of flatten recursively. Okay? That array.isArray function is very handy for this problem, because you want to check if the index is, or the element that's found is an array, then send it back through our loop. And if you've already solved this problem, don't paste any code. No secrets. But yeah, maybe what I'll do, we'll solve arrays and callbacks for you tomorrow morning. Okay, so I'll go through my interpretation of how to solve these things. Does anyone have any questions? I hope that this little check-in this afternoon was helpful. Please provide us with any feedback. No. You're not supposed to complete it by today. So end of day tomorrow, we'll have you submit a pull request for all of this, if you haven't already. If you already have, awesome. The white boxes in VS Code, I'm assuming these these gray boxes here in the green, is that what you're talking about? Okay, so that's when you're using Quokka exclusively. It's just saying that this is not being, the compiler is not actually worried about this function because it's not being called or referenced anywhere else yet. No, okay, so tomorrow, so now that you've moved through arrays and callbacks, tomorrow you're supposed to be working on closures and objects. If you're already done with all of it, so this whole thing will be submitted tomorrow. If you've already completed all 4 of these files and they're passing all of the tests, including the stretch problems, that's great. You're definitely ahead of the curve, so go ahead and submit a pull request now, and I will give you more stuff to work on, okay, between now and tomorrow evening. And we'll be able to go further in depth as things continue to grow. Day 1, it's just kind of like fire hose, and we're just giving you a lot of stuff, like new things like pair programming, you know, linters, tests, linters. Everyone's like, oh crap, Ryan's talking about the linter. Yeah, the linter sucks, but it makes you a better programmer. Just believe me on that. So right now, if you're still working through arrays and callbacks, awesome. Try and finish. Tomorrow, you're going to be able to work through closures and objects and then more stuff if you get done with all that, okay? But for now, just focus on callbacks, arrays, and then I would move into objects, then closure for your last one. If you finish the whole thing, submit the PR, you're good to go. We'll talk about some other stuff. Yeah, so keep the same partners for today and tomorrow, and then we'll switch it up on Wednesday, okay? Awesome. It looks like we have a really solid mix here. A lot of people sort of kind of scattered throughout the spectrum, some brand new programmers and some people who have some experience. And so if you're one of those on the end of the spectrum that has some experience, one of your options, if you're done early, is to lend your help to others. That's something that we've seen the previous couple of cohorts start doing just naturally, is like, hey, I know this stuff, I can teach somebody else. And there are students in other cohorts who are like opening up Zoom sessions and being like, hey, everyone who's struggling on this topic, come in here. I'm going to try and explain it. And usually a TA will jump in and make sure that, you know, everything's still honky-dory and people are, you know, learning. But that's a very productive way of using your time if you already know this stuff. Theme I'm using is called Cobalt 2 by Wes Boss. Cobalt 2 theme. Basically anything that Wes Boss touches is pure gold. I love everything that he teaches. I draw a lot of inspiration from him. And his name is Boss. So can't get better than that. And he has a bunch of default settings. I don't like some of his default settings. If you look at, there's one of these. So font weight, and then so font family. So check this out. He wants you to use this setting with his, and I just kind of get annoyed with it. Whoops. Whoops. So now that I've installed it, see if it pops up with that. I guess I might need an actual thing. Anyway, his has his like default settings I'm just not the biggest fan of, so I just have made my own settings that I like for it. But yeah, this like, I don't know, I guess it's kind of fun. For best experience. Anyway. Okay, so if you are still trying to get VS Code to run your files with Quokka, the idea there is to, or the way to do this is to run your command palette, which is either Control or Command Shift and P. So hold Command Shift or Control Shift and then hit P, and it'll bring up this workspace executable functions. Like these are executables, okay? So these are commands you can execute. So if you start typing in Quokka, you're going to get a list of a bunch of things that you can use now that the package is installed. One of the ways that I get this started is just by doing it on a current file, the file that I'm concerned with. So if you click on that current file, or I think it's just Command or Control and Q, that'll do it as well. So Command K brings you into what's called like an insert type mode. So Command K and then Q, whoops, I did that wrong. So Command K, I'm in insert type mode with my editor, and then Q, it's going to start Quokka on this file. But yeah, so that's the fastest way, but I always pull it up right here just so I can click on, in terms of like showing you guys, I can click on the executable. Okay, so, or I can start a new JavaScript file. But primarily, you're going to want to be using it on the current file. Did that solve the issues there, Anthony? You do not need to buy Quokka Pro. The Community Edition is fine. You don't need to buy any piece of software for this class. Yeah, no problem. Finally got it. Nice. I love it. Okay, so yeah, if you are struggling with this, feel free to reach out. I can jump in a Zoom. It's just a really fun package. Like it's not necessary to complete the course. I just really like it, okay? There's no reason that you should have to be doing this. So this is when I opened, so if you just say Command P or Control P and just type in that caret, it will pop up your executables. Or if you want it from scratch, you do Command Shift P, right? So or Control Shift P and look at it. I'm going to post this because I want everyone who's using VS Code to reference this from here on and henceforth. So there's 2 PDFs that you can get online. Yes, I sent out a calendar link. Let me know if you didn't get it. Just DM me. Mac and Windows, I don't feel like, let's see if they provide a Linux version. Yeah, there it is. So I can't tell you like the best ways to go about like, learning commands other than like researching what commands are available to you and just using them. That's the best way to learn how to use your text editor. A lot of things that I like are Command Shift D, and I speak from a Mac perspective. Option Command Shift up and down will highlight multiple lines. There's so many, so many, and you just have to get used to them. Okay. Please DM me if you need a calendar link or calendar invite. DM me if you have any questions, and just continue working on this project in all 4 of these files, trying to get all these files passed. And then tomorrow morning, we're just get ready for another deep dive, and we're going to get deeper and deeper. Today is pretty much just like, review, overview, some of the fundamentals, the, housekeeping stuff. All right. Let me know if you guys need anything. I'll be around until 5 p.m. Pacific today. So see you later.